going to change subjects here. You have the advantage of not having to run in 2012. But how do you see the presidential race shaping up? I mean, it just seems like campaigns are on steroids now. So how do you see it shaping up next year?
I think the 2012 election, the presidential election at the national level, is going to be a fundamental debate. It's going to be a difference presented to the American people between our president, who sees the value in compromise, who sees all of us in this together, and who believes that the government can and should play a role in helping with recovery and helping make us a stronger and more competitive country. And a likely opponent, if you look at any of the three leading candidates at the moment, who really believe that government should be radically reduced, significantly cut down, should have as small an impact on people's lives as possible. And while that rhetoric sounds good, I think when people begin to work through what the consequences would be if we didn't have a Department of Education or an EPA, if we didn't have food safety inspectors making sure that our food is safe, or water quality inspectors making sure our water is safe, the consequences are big. At the end of the session this summer, the FAA, the folks who man the air traffic control towers and who supervise airport expansion projects, wasn't reauthorized. There was a disagreement right at the debt ceiling fight that allowed their authorization to stop. And for a matter of a couple of weeks, construction projects all over America at airports stopped, and 70,000 people employed in construction were sent home and taken off the job. There are things like that that the federal government does that most folks just don't pay attention to. When Hurricane Irene was grinding its way up the East Coast, all of those predictions from the National Weather Service, from NOAA, were from federal employees. And it's easy to dismiss all of that as just waste and things we can get rid of, and can't the private sector do that as well? But I think we in government have a challenge. Those of us who serve Delaware in the Congress have a challenge, and those who are up for election in 2012 have a challenge. Articulate how you're going to make federal government leaner, more efficient, more responsive, and articulate why we need it and what its essential roles are beyond just defense.
We've seen a lot of, there's been a lot of animosity in Washington over the debt ceiling debate and other things between Democrats and Republicans. How would you categorize your relationship with members on the other side of the aisle? Are you friends with any Republicans? Did you sat with Republicans at the State of the Union? How is Chris Coons' relationship with Republicans in the Senate?
One of the things I heard clearly from Delawareans in my campaign last year was that they expect us to be bipartisan, to actually make real friendships across the aisle, to listen to each other and try and reach compromise. If you look at the legislation that I've introduced or I've co-sponsored or I've voted on, I am on dozens of bills with Republican senators. And Senator Kaufman's advice to me was to work as hard as I can to build real relationships, not just casual acquaintances. So I go to the prayer breakfast every Wednesday morning that I can. This is a multi-faith, senators-only conversation that happens every Wednesday morning, where one senator stands up and talks about their personal faith experience. It's a remarkable way to get to know people. I work out in the Senate gym when I can. It's right around the corner from my office. I have no excuse not to. Also an opportunity to see folks in an informal setting and to chat as the day's beginning. And when I went to visit our troops in Afghanistan and Pakistan, I went with Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee, very conservative Republican. But nothing helps you see what you have in common like visiting our troops abroad, in the field, in service. And nothing helps like having 12 hours on an airplane together to talk and to get to know each other. We've since had dinner with our spouses, we visited each other, we talk pretty directly. And I think part of why he's someone I've been building a friendship with is he was a successful businessman, but then he was a mayor. I was a county executive. When you've solved local problems, when you've dealt with the challenges of sewers and building permits and police contracts and response to constituents, it helps. Last, Johnny Isaacson, who serves with me on the Foreign Relations Committee. I'm the chair of the African Affairs Subcommittee. He's the ranking minority. We've traveled together. We've spent time with our spouses together. We've been to the prayer breakfast together. Johnny's a wonderful human being. Senator Corker and Senator Isaacson, we really don't agree on some of those basic partisan issues, but we can agree to listen to each other, to be respectful of each other, and to try and find the sorts of compromises that I know the people of Delaware would like me to be working hard towards.
The 9/11 anniversary coming up really quick here. You voted against the initial extension of the Patriot Act. Where does that stand now? Are we getting safer, or we kind of reached a plateau of security 10 years later?
Well, the Patriot Act was extended. My concern as a member of the Judiciary Committee was that the Judiciary Committee had worked very hard to review some of the challenges, some of the problems, and how the Patriot Act has been used and enforced in the decades since 9/11. And I thought a very reasonable, modest package of reforms, particularly to something called national security letters that were misused in the previous administration, was proposed but not taken up or seriously considered, not debated on the floor, and not considered for amendment. And as I said in a speech on the floor at the time, I support our law enforcement and our counterterrorism folks, the folks who serve us at home and abroad, having all the tools they need. But we shouldn't have the broad sweeping powers in the Patriot Act go without any congressional oversight, without any effective review or amendment, particularly when we are on notice that they have been abused, they have been misapplied in some circumstances. So that was a very tough choice for me. And back to your point about bipartisanship, it was a speech on the floor by Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky about liberty and privacy that moved me towards really thinking seriously about voting against extension if there were no amendments. On the broader question of our security as a nation, we are still engaged vigorously in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have nearly 50,000 troops on the ground in Iraq, and we have nearly 100,000 on the ground in Afghanistan. And we're going to spend more than $130 billion this year in Afghanistan. I am concerned that our strategy in Afghanistan remains nation building. I frankly think the nation we should be building is our own. And I did support a significant drawdown. I think we need to realign our strategy towards counterterrorism. We have made more progress in the last 2 years in capturing and killing the leaders and the foot soldiers of al-Qaeda than at any point in the last decade. And I do think we are getting closer to being safer in the war against international terrorism. But I don't think we can stop being vigilant. I don't think we can stop being engaged in the world. And I frankly think the approach to the conflict in Libya has borne out well so far. We allowed our allies to take the lead in terms of the military engagement, the cost, and the risk. We provided some critical resources in terms of intelligence and logistics and coordination that only the United States possesses. But if we're going to be engaged in making the world a safer place, we can't send American troops everywhere. We can't take the lead in every conflict. We shouldn't, and we can't afford it. But if we want to have our allies in NATO and elsewhere take the lead in critical areas, I'm going to support that, because in the end, I think we are safer when we are part of a muscular multilateralism rather than just going it on our own in every single conflict.
Want to lighten things up a little bit, talk about social media. You know, you're on Twitter, you're on YouTube as well, doing these messages on your train. You're making the most of your commute. You know, you live in Wilmington, but then you're commuting to Washington, D.C., and you're sort of answering your constituents' questions in these YouTube messages. What kind of feedback have you received in these messages from the train or transmissions from the train, and are you still doing it?
Yes. We call them correspondence from the commute. My communications director, Ian Koski, came up with the idea of having me just sit with a laptop with a little webcam while I'm on the train down and back, which is most days and takes 4 hours. It's 2 down, 2 back. And it's a great way for me to communicate directly back to folks who've either sent a letter or an email, posted something on Facebook or Twitter, and they're often surprised to get a direct personal response. When we were in session for days and days on end around the debt ceiling vote, and I wasn't coming back and forth every day, I did a whole series from my desk or from our office, and also started answering phones when folks were calling in. And what's interesting to me was that Delawareans were not at all surprised that I was answering the phone or that I called them back when they'd left some messages. We had some great conversations over those couple days about people's concerns, about why can't the Senate reach a compromise, why can't we make progress, and specific questions folks had about our troops overseas, about federal programs. I enjoyed doing that. I did an open town hall that was at Deltec here in Wilmington and broadcast on talk radio. We had, I think, about 100 people come. We were there 2 hours, and I took all questions and answered them. Not everybody was happy with the answers, but I think part of my job is being accessible and accountable to the people who hired me through the election of 2010. And
earlier this year, you took a stab at comedy at the Correspondents' Dinner. Tell us a little bit about how that came about, and were you afraid you were going to bomb? You got some big laughs.
I would say I was more than a little anxious about that. I'd never been to something like that before. They invite 2 freshman senators and 2 freshman House members, and the audience is about 300, 400 people, most of whom are journalists. Most of them had no idea who I was, had never met me, and had no sense of who I was. And so actually just before I went to do that, Senator Schumer of New York, who is no stranger to cameras, speaks a great deal on the floor and is often on television news shows, pulled me aside and said, I just want to tell you, I did that dinner a couple years ago. Worst public experience of my life. I rehearsed, I practiced, I had stuff written, I thought I knew exactly what I was doing. I was a complete bomb, huge embarrassment, ruined my reputation. Good luck.
Yeah, really boosted your confidence, right?
Oh my God.
Oh, he said that before you
Yes,
spoke.
just before I left, because that dinner actually happened to be, this is very early last year, when all the Senate Democrats were away for a weekend at a retreat talking about sort of where are we going in job creation, the economy. And so I drove from Charlottesville up and then back. But I thought it was a great experience. I enjoyed it. Senator Kelly Ayotte of New Hampshire was the freshman senator of the other party. And it actually was a great bonding experience. So the two of us were just nervous as all get out and got to joking about it before and afterwards. And it's opened up a couple of really good conversations for me with Senator Ayotte.
Well, you got a lot of laughs in our newsroom.
Yes, it was certainly replayed. Final question for you as we close here. Coming up on I guess a couple months before your one-year anniversary in the Senate. Is it what you expected?
I appreciate Delaware more than I ever did before. I knew in growing up here, in my work in the private sector, in 10 years in county government service, that I'm blessed to represent a community of really reasonable people who care about each other, who are willing to sacrifice for each other, and who have a sense of community that's really very strong. But I don't think I appreciated how different that is from a lot of the rest of our country until serving in the Senate. As I talk with other members and listen to them describe some of the town hall meetings they have, some of the contests and debates they have at home, Delaware's really a special place. And I'm grateful it's a place where I'm able to serve and yet be home almost every day, see my young kids regularly, still be a part of the community, and still attend the same church and be in the same neighborhood and be a part of the fabric of my family's life. It is demanding. We have enormous challenges in front of us as a country. I'm grateful that as a freshman I've had a chance on 4 significant committees to make some contributions, but frankly it makes me appreciate Delaware more than ever.
After having spoken with all 3 members of our congressional delegation, you've all agreed that Congress could probably learn a thing or two from our state. All right, thank you, Senator Coons. Thanks for joining us on First. I know that we will be talking again.